Hi, this is Danielle Staples, and this presentation I have made for you to give you some recommendations for practices and potential research candidates. And they're all regarding the community college environment, mainly because that is where I work. I work at a community college in Colorado. So my first recommendation for practice is about placement testing. Placement testing in a standalone format is not working. According to the Medhanian team research in 2012, the AccuPlacer, which is what our college uses, does not contribute to either predicting enrollment or predicting student success in a course that the AccuPlacer places them in when you compare it solely to the ACT alone. Essentially, it would be more accurate to use the ACT than the placement test that we make all incoming onboarding students take. So, one recommendation for practice would be to move to a true multiple measures format. So there's a couple of options. What some schools in California are doing is they're offering what's called a multiple measures booster. So students will take a placement exam, and then after the placement exam, if they're within a certain score range, they'll consider such things as the student's work habits and family situation and previous school credit, and they'll give the student a boost to their score so that they can get directly into a course. Some schools, I haven't found any research on it, but some schools are considering doing a multiple measures format in lieu of placement testing. So, for example, you could look at a high school transcript and you could evaluate a student based on their high school GPA, the last math class that they took, the grade in that math class. Did they take math all 4 years? And then use those characteristics to place a student rather than just testing alone. So the recommendation for practice aligns nicely for a recommendation for research. And this is one that I'm particularly interested in and I have been looking into for the past year. And what I initially feel like I would want to do with this is a quantitative causal comparative approach. So in this approach, there could be two potential groups that the researcher is studying. The first group would be business as usual, and the students would continue to use the AccuPlacer. The second group would be your experimental group, and that would use your multiple measure. So you could do that with an exam. My preference would be to use no exam for that group, and then use those two groups to run statistical analysis, and you could test for a significant difference. So you could look at things like course enrollment, course completion, course grades, and at my community college we use a common final exam. So you could analyze to see if there's a difference between the overall results and the course competencies for each group of students. Another research that could be considered for a placement testing policy could be a qualitative research approach. And this could be approached from either the grounded theory or the case study methodology. The reason I would approach it from a quantitative perspective, according to Medhani and his team, for the last 30 years, there's been this controversy about why we still give placement exams, and many schools disagree, and often that involves a struggle between administration and faculty members as to why placement exams are necessary. So a good qualitative option for a research proposal could look into math instructors and their views on placement exams. So one thing we could look at is why some instructors are so set on needing placement exams. Possibly there's a historical reason why they're used. It could be personal reasons why placement exams are necessary in their views. But either case, it could be an exploratory method of seeing if there's an overarching theme or themes as to why placement exams still exist in the community college environment, which is supposed to be an open access environment. Another recommendation for practice involves developmental math in general. The traditional developmental math sequence is a 4-course sequence. Unfortunately, this 4-course sequence tends to have a low completion rate. It extends the time for students to graduate. In some schools, it could take a student an additional 2 years to graduate college. And it costs not only the students but the taxpayers a significant amount of money. 2 different sources have said anywhere between $2 and $4 billion annually in developmental math education. So a recommendation for practice would be to revamp the way that developmental math education is offered. So one thing we would want to consider is reducing the exit points. So when I say reduce exit points, do we really need a 4-course developmental sequence? Or could we decrease it to 1 developmental course and you focus the developmental course on the degree pathway instead of this overarching general set of competencies that we think all students need to know? There's some theories out there that students that need a statistical background probably don't need to know how to graph a quadratic equation in order to do statistics. So shouldn't we focus these preparatory classes on the content needed in the degree pathway? Therefore, you'd be able to reduce the number of developmental courses needed. Another emphasis that's been placed on developmental education redesign lately is to implement more co-requisite instruction. So co-requisite instruction involves mainstreaming students that would normally be considered developmental or remedial based on their placement exam. Go ahead and let them take the college level statistics or the college level algebra course. But in addition, they also take a developmental supplementary course with it. And in that course, they can get help on their requisite skills. They can get help on prerequisite skills. They can learn about study habits and behaviors and everything to help them be successful in the class. So this would be a recommendation for future practices. A recommendation for research also focuses on this revamping of developmental math education. In 2013, the state of Colorado underwent a developmental education redesign. And in this redesign, many of the recommendations for practice that I just listed were included. Decreasing the number of exit points, using the pathway model, implementing co-requisite instruction. Yet, to date, no published research has been done for the Colorado developmental education redesign. So I propose that a really good way to study this redesign would be through the mixed methods approach. And I think the sequential explanatory method would be a great method to study this process. First, you'd want to start with a quantitative method, and for that I'd use a causal comparative method. So in this situation, I would compare the traditional 4-course sequence to the 1-course pathway model. Test to see if there's a significant difference in enrollment and completion and retention. And again, at our college, you could use the final exam scores to see if students are comprehending at a similar level. Once the quantitative analysis is complete, you could then move to a qualitative analysis, possibly a case study approach, where you look at the different designs that were implemented in the co-requisite instruction, since that is a major part of the Colorado developmental redesign. Also, in the redesign, they left colleges autonomy to decide how to implement co-requisite instruction. So in our 13-school system, each school has approached the co-requisite model in a different way. So it would be interesting to do a case study approach to see which co-requisite model best supported student success in the DevEd redesign. The last recommendation I have for you today for practice involves the dilemma of college access versus success. Um, over, it is known that community colleges are supposed to be open access institutions. Unfortunately, with the placement exams that virtually all community colleges give today, many students are turned away at the door. So you apply to college, you're accepted to the college, and then we tell you before you can enroll for classes, you need to come take a placement test so we can see which level of class you're able to be successful in. And then at that time, we blindside you and say, no, you can't really take any classes here. It's frustrating for the student. It's frustrating for administrators to turn students away at the door. And obviously, it's frustrating for everyone in the fiscal office when we are struggling to keep the lights on. So my recommendation for practice in this situation would be advising, first and foremost, and what I like to call refresher courses so that students can access the classes that they would like. So in research, specifically in the Rodriguez, the Metrocarp, and the Hairbook research, students expressed that they did not know they had to take a placement exam, and many students that did know they had to take a placement exam did not know that their college offered preparation material for the placement exam. So for best practice, it's important that we advise students. We let them know the expectations of the placement exam. We let them know how they can get help and how they can be prepared for these tests. And that would be a good recommendation for any student before they go to complete an application process. So an interesting recommendation for research based on a similar topic would be about the student perception of placement testing. And for this, I do think another mixed methods approach would be good. And I think a sequential exploratory method would be most appropriate here. The first thing I would like to do personally as a researcher would be to look at the qualitative analysis of placement testing. So I'd first like to look at student placement perception, specifically those students that were not able to place in any class at all. It's interesting, in the Koch study that I read, one student was quoted as saying, if you know enough to graduate from high school, that really should be enough to get you into college. So it would be interesting to dive further, specifically for community college students applying for an open access institution that are therefore turned down, and see what that perception is. Additionally, a metacognitive survey would be interesting to see if there's a correlation between student characteristics, metacognitive skills, and their persistence in college. I'd then follow up with a quantitative analysis and look for themes that emerged that could potentially explain what's happening or explore relationships between the qualitative and the quantitative. So numbers that would be of specific interest to me would be the ratio of the students that persisted. They didn't place initially, but they took the refresher course and they persisted, and they actually did enroll in the refresher course. How many of those students completed the refresher course? How many of those students then retested and took a math class? And of those students, how many enrolled in the math class? Because what's amazing from the research that we're reading, so many students take the placement exam, are qualified to take a course, but because it's a developmental course, never enroll. And then, of course, after students enroll, the obvious would be how many students actually passed that class. And did it bring value to the college to go out of their way and offer these refresher courses for their students? In any case, on this slide, I've listed several different references for you to review that I have used in this presentation and to make suggestions for practice and suggestions for research. Please let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.